Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the new home of power mining analysis. Now, in addition to the huge press release from Bitfarms yesterday, there's been a flurry of news in the media this week in relation to your favorite Bitcoin mining companies. We've got production results, we've got debt paydowns, and we've got a ton of HPC activity that we want to cover in today's video with our resident Bitcoin mining analyst, none other than Anthony Power. Now, before we get into all that, please take a second, smash the like button, you guys. Big help to myself and the channel. Anthony loves it. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join. We're just about at the 45,000 subscriber milestone. This is our goal before we go down to Bitcoin Nashville. We'd love to have you as part of the community. And finally, you guys, leave a comment in the section below if you're currently holding any of the companies we mentioned in today's video, your outlook on the sector in the back half of 2024, and which of the two sides of this debate in terms of Bitcoin mining or HPC you currently sit on. Now, with that being said, let's get into today's video. Okay guys, so that's right. Today's video, we've got a follow-up on a number of the core miners we cover on the channel in terms of new press releases, headlines, and news this week. Anthony, a full agenda, but before we get into it, very interesting meeting with Ben yesterday from Bitfarms, big appointment into the CEO position. How did you feel about yesterday's discussion? How are you feeling about Bitfarms?
It was good. It was a good podcast yesterday. Ben's been at the company 5 years. He's Chief Mining Officer, now the CEO. Bitfarms are better off keeping Ben in the company than letting him go to somewhere else. And he's got a team around him. So it's, remember, it's not just Ben. There is a team around him, an experienced team around him. They've just brought in another director who was previously with another mining company as well, so lots of experience there. So you've got a strong team. They're operating 15 locations, 4 countries, growing out the business, predominantly now in South America. And they were close to hitting their target. I mean, it was a big target to hit 12 exahash. Bear in mind, a couple of months before they were only at 6.5. So pulled all stops out to get to 11.4. And Ben said that they'll be at 12 this month, so that'll be a good sign. And he firmly believes they'll get to their target of 21 by the end of the year. So hats off to them. And HPC is on their agenda too. So the market should like that. We haven't seen much in terms of the share price movement. So the markets hasn't responded to the appointment maybe in the way that retail investors hope for, but. So Bitcoin hovering around the 57,000 mark. We need to see it get to 62,000 before we see probably more impetus in regards to mining stocks. But I thought it was a good podcast.
Yeah, I sure enjoyed it. I'm a big fan of Ben myself. I'm a shareholder of Bitfarms and Riot, just for full disclosure, and I think he's really got what it takes. We talked about some of the traditional CEO kind of backgrounds and work history, and Ben obviously doesn't fit that traditional mold, but I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for this company with such a strong operator at the helm there. You're sure right, the share price hasn't responded, nor has really any of the other miners today. We were just complaining about the portfolios before we started filming here. It always seems, Anthony, the days you think are looking okay at the open in the pre-market, things take a turn for the red. And then conversely, on the other side, we'll have days like last Friday, huge drop in Bitcoin and portfolios setting all-time highs. So your guess is as good as mine, Anthony. We've got 7 companies to talk about today, so a stacked agenda. I'll throw in some timestamps for you guys just because it's a lot of content. First and foremost, from the Wulf Pack, we've got a big announcement today. Unexpected, really, pay down of their debt situation. So we've had Paul Prager on the channel a number of times. You've questioned him about the debt, Anthony. He's continued to say, hey, this is more than manageable. We've got our hands all over this. And looks like that's the case today, hey?
Absolutely. This was a surprise announcement. I mean, we did know that TeraWulf were going to make another payment of their debt in the month of July because Paul and Patrick, the CFO, had highlighted they were planning to do one this month. what you've got to remember is the share price has done really well over the last sort of 6, 7 weeks. It's gone up considerably, and what that means for a company like TeraWulf is its valuation today was over 1.8 billion. Bear in mind a lot of these miners were sort of like a third of this value not too long ago, so they've really the share price has done really well. And what that means for the companies is if they've got an ATM in issue, so they can use the ATM to sell shares on the market and raise that money quite quickly without giving a large chunk of the company away. So if they've been doing it over the last few weeks, they'll have been probably worked out sort of 4 or 5% of the company to cover that debt. Now, bear in mind, when the share price was significantly lower and the market capitalization was, hovering around 200, 300 million. That's a challenge to get rid of that amount of debt using shares. You're giving away so much of the company. So they've waited and it's paid off for them. So the share price today was getting very close to all year high. And we'll find out soon from when they release their next accounts, the level of shares they actually release to cover this, because they'll highlight in their update how much of the ATM they've used since the 30th of June, as well as the last quarter. So their financial accounts will be up to the 30th of June, but these NASDAQ companies have to articulate how many shares they've sold as at the day they issue their results. If their results come out, say, I don't know, middle of August, then it'll be shares issued as at that date, and that'll be on the front sheet of the 10Q, the quarterly update. But yeah, no, a really good announcement today. They've repaid 77.5 million of the loan. It's now zero debt on the balance sheet and no more interest payments. I think the debt was the one mark on TeraWulf that everyone was sort of like commenting on. It's we've seen the likes of other mining companies who had debt, like Argo Blockchain, like Greenwich, like Stronghold Mining, who've just struggled to get out of that position. We did see Bitfarms amazingly recover from their 160 million of debt. And TeraWulf had a sort of like a figure, I think it was about 140 million at their highest point, but they've been very good at communicating how they're going to pay that down. So we've seen regular updates and regular payments being made to get that debt down. And it's got down to this like just over 70 million. And for me, I was expecting, maybe there was going to be a 20 million payment now, and then another news item to say maybe in the next quarter, depending on the Bitcoin price, they can raise enough funds, enough profits, because they do operate quite profitable. Even at this level, their energy price is one of the lowest in the market at the moment. So, but this was a real good news story today. So, by releasing all that debt, they've got zero debt, zero interest payments, puts them in a really strong financial position, and they've got now they've got strong cash generation because they haven't got any interest payments to make. I mean, bear in mind, I think the last quarter they paid over 3 million in interest payments alone, just in one quarter. So it's significant amounts of interest covering that debt. So this is a real positive story. Paul's emphasised that the company is expanding its energy capacity now this year from 210 megawatts all the way up to 295 this year, and they've also got the potential to add a further 300 megawatts. For more sustainable energy infrastructure. And power and infrastructure is the name of the game now. We know that the market wants to see that. And, TeraWulf, like a number of other miners, they've said they're going to get into the HPC side. They've already sort of allocated a number of megawatts to that project, and they're looking to grow that significantly. And I think, again, it's, the news story recently with the Core Scientific and CoreWeave deals, it's opened a lot of eyes. I mean, everyone we spoke to on interviews over the past few weeks has been nodding and saying, we've got to look at this potential. HPC and AI are here to stay, and we want a part of it. So, I don't blame TeraWulf going down this route whatsoever. I mean, the pure play miners, we'll see how that works out with the Bitcoin price, but this is an opportunity for them to grow, get great revenues in the HPC space that are guaranteed, predictable margins, and that will help scale their Bitcoin mining because they're not moving away from that one bit. They're actually increasing their mining hash rate as well by the end of the year to over 13 with further growth next year. But a good update.
Yeah, I definitely think so myself, Anthony. This one has grown into one of my top positions now. As you say, strong share price performance. Great to see management showing that discipline and patience to hold off on the ATM until they can really get their biggest bang for their buck. No pun intended there. So congrats to the team at TeraWulf. Not to mention they have AWS and the Hope of Port Authority knocking on their door, Anthony, wanting access to their site. So a lot of good things cooking for TeraWulf and the Wulf Pack. We'll continue to keep you guys apprised there. Next one up is Rob Chang and Gryphon Mining. Now, he put out a Q2 update, so kind of a preemptive Q2 earnings almost. Rolling up the 3 quarters, really giving a holistic view of what's been going on at Gryphon Mining. What was your take on this one, Anthony?
Yeah, it was interesting that they did a quarterly update rather than like a monthly update. There were bits of the monthly information there, but you've got to sort of like then start calculating what the June position was because we've got the April and May position, so we can go back and look at those numbers and then come up with a figure for June. So I'm not sure what they were trying to achieve with that, whether it is a case of just given the retail shares what Q2 is going to look like when it's finally announced in August. But in terms of mining, they mined 22 Bitcoin during the month, and from a hash rate perspective, it's been pretty much standard throughout that 3 months. So around about 0.9 exahash. Similar sort of size to what DMG and slightly bigger than what Soluna is. So those 3 mining companies all operating from a self-mine perspective within about 100 petahash of each other. So, and from a case of for the quarter, they've mined 884, and an average price of about 65,000. So that's been for their efficiency for the month of June. They quoted their 25 Bitcoin per exahash. I've got it slightly lower than that because I've done the calculation. And they said they've got an uptime of 99.4%. So utilization pretty good for the month of June. When you consider we're in them sort of hot months where miners would expect to curtail a bit longer. They've just joined the Russell 2000 tech indices, so that's again from 1st of July. That's sort of given them a bit of a bump, and again, like all the other miners, they're now looking at or considering the potential to go into the HPC space and look at the opportunities there. So Rob's been having plenty of discussions and calls and site visits. They've had something like over 20 different opportunities. So they've got to carry out, due diligence on all those opportunities there, visit sites, go through the numbers, obviously speak to these potential acquisitions. And so they're hopeful that from doing that piece of work, they'll start announcing a number of selection, a number of opportunities moving forward. So, as I say, we had Rob on the podcast recently. He said his phone was non-stop in terms of the M&A type discussion. So, overall, but we want to see the hash rate increase there. I mean, they've given a target. I mean, it was a sort of a serious target of 10 exahash by the end of the year, and they're at 0.9 by halfway through the year. So it's a challenge to get to that there, but we want to see some growth this year. Otherwise, it's a case of you fall behind the rest of the pack. And the challenge then is how do you grow when you haven't got the ability to grow in terms of funds available. They have got a small amount of Bitcoin. I think it's like 16 Bitcoin on the balance sheet, so it gives them a little bit of a cash runway there and in their treasury position. And so we'll just have to see what these opportunities look like when they start being informed to the market. So interesting update.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the M&A activity in this portion of the mining sector, Anthony. As you say, the ATMs just don't work the same if you've got a smaller market cap. They're going to have to combine some of these companies if they want to hit those exahash goals. And it's going to be interesting to see which fish eats the other here. Great update, though, from Gryphon. I do like the Q2 roll-up, just so you can kind of see the full quarterly summary there, especially with some of the bigger events happening in Q2. Now, speaking of big events, we've got another big headline out from Hut 8 Corp. This one, Anthony, you and I were looking at the share price. It's just about tripled here in recent memory. Asher really starting to see some life in terms of share price, volume, investor attention. Now they've come out with a big announcement today, converting in excess of 200 megawatts of that 1.1 gigawatt pipeline that they've referenced a few times on our show. So 1,100 megawatts within the hopper, and they've now started to chip away at that. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so a really good update from Hut today. As you articulated there, 205 megawatts of power and land been added for a West Texas site. We've seen these miners talk about pipeline of power, and what it means is that they've got, the ability to access it in the future if the right project can be agreed, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we have John Belazaire on from Soluna, one of the smaller miners who are growing these by project, and they had a 2 gigawatt pipeline, which they've got access to. Well, Hut have got a 1.1 gigawatt pipeline. So, and we know IREN have put in their updates, they've got one site at nearly 1.5 gigawatts, and with a further 1 gigawatt pipeline as well. So we're seeing this sort of terminology, and this will be interesting now because the market's looking for power infrastructure, and it's how that's going to be utilized. So the site itself is adjacent to a wind farm. It's connected to the ERCOT grid, so therefore you've got wholesale power pricing, and they have got a power purchase agreement for this one. So in the same way that the likes of Riot Platforms have got, and Cipher, also based in Cipher Mining, also based in Texas, have got these PPA agreements. Hut have also gone down that as well. And there are pros and cons to having these PPA agreements. And Jason's articulated that Corsicana is going to be on the market price, because there are some benefits when the energy price drops to negative. You can access that effectively, get paid for using it. With a PPA, you're paying that price irrelevant of the actual price of energy at the time. So there are some, it's not all pros for going for a PPA, but it does keep your costs sort of more predictable in terms of you've got a PPA agreement there, so you can utilize that, and there'll be lots of benefits that they can do in the same way that Riot do at their Rockdale facility as well. So that's a really good update there. The engineering for the new data center is underway, and this will increase their current infrastructure now from 1.1 to 1.3 gigawatts. So what they're actually managing at the moment in terms of total infrastructure, that goes up from 1.1 to 1.3. So a really good update. And actually, in fairness to Hut, they without the self mining, they've been providing some really good updates of late. And like you say, the share price was at, I don't know, $6.50 in January, and it was approaching $17-18 in the last few days. So we've seen a bit of a turnaround there. Still needs to go further, I believe. Compared to where Hut was in 2021. Hut on its own then had a valuation of about $2.5 billion at one point in 2021. So not recovered to those sort of highs yet, but certainly going in the right direction. This is another great position. And bear in mind, Asher, has said, judge me in Q3. Well, it's looking good up to now.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, another big storyline we've been following, obviously, since our trip down to Denton, is the Core Scientific CoreWeave deal. In addition to that, and really on the backs of that deal, we've seen a ton of interest from retail investors and Wall Street, as evident on our tour there, Anthony, in the Core Scientific story. Share price has taken off, and as a result, we're now starting to see the first round of those redeemable notes actually being converted. Despite the dilution, share price holding up very, very well, as you and I talked about yesterday. This is super bullish for CORZ, eh?
Absolutely. And so they've got sort of like one tranche of notes and two tranches of warrants, and they've all got sort of various levels that it can be converted at. So this is the notes themselves, and they had a mandatory conversion once the share price achieved $7.79 for 20 trading days, and that was accomplished on about the 5th of June. So tomorrow, the 10th of June, these notes will be physically converted into 45 million shares. And that's good. I mean, that you know, the great thing is Core Scientific, when they came out of Chapter 11, and it still isn't 6 months ago since they came out of Chapter 11, came out with a really good, robust plan of how they were going to achieve it. And they gave themselves quite a significant amount of time to do this. It wasn't supposed to happen, I don't think, in the first 6 months. They gave themselves 3 years for the Tranche W warrant to be exercised, and they gave the Tranche Z warrant about 5 years. Because remember at the time that the share price was coming out of Chapter 11 was significantly lower than it is today, a fraction of the amount. And so, you can't turn around and say, well, we'll just expect to grow from a company at a valuation of in the low hundreds of millions. All of a sudden, they've got a valuation close to 2 billion in that space of time. But I think the market have really liked the work that they've put in to get through Chapter 11. They never had any issues with operational production during that period. They were consistent month by month. So that never faltered. They brought a new team in. The whole board of directors was changed, led by Adam Sullivan, who we've been fortunate to meet. I've met Adam a couple of times now this year. And, he's got a great team around him there. They're doing great work. It was a pleasure to go down to Denton and see the facility there, to understand about what's going to happen with the contract with CoreWeave, which really is that's the biggest news story in the mining sector this year. I think of all the things we've covered, that's the one that sort of stands out at the moment, because it's not just for Core Scientific now. The whole market's actually looked up. The Bitcoin mining market's looked up, and everyone's like, every update we're doing now is literally a miner starting to move into there. I mean, 2 weeks ago we would have said Bitfarms is still we were on the podcast still a pure play miner. Now they're having their eye on HPC. TeraWulf, they're into HPC. All these miners only now, I think there's just Marathon, Riot, and CleanSpark, who haven't sort of announced anything yet. But watch this space. If it becomes more prevalent, that if you've got that power and facility to deliver for these companies, that would be great. But yeah, so Core Scientific, those notes will be converted tomorrow. So that's sort of 45 million of shares that will be issued, and that dilution is known. So it's not like it's a surprise. It's just happened quicker than people expected. And the interesting part is that the CORZ warrant, once that is over, I think it's $9.83 or something like that, close to $10 for 20 days, that one's mandatory converted as well. So that could happen, pretty soon as well. The CORZ W warrant we've articulated before, it's down to the shareholders. They've got until the 31st of December 2026 to actually exercise that option. Some will option it, may have optioned it already. Some people may have sold the warrant, and believe you me, there'll be people wanting to pick up those warrants because of the value in the warrants at the moment. But once those warrants are exercised, the rest of the debt goes away, and it gives them about 300 or 400 million in terms of cash runway. So the turnaround this year potentially in Core Scientific is real. And then you're then operating then as a company. Yes, they'll have 400 million shares on the balance sheet, and at $10 a share, that gives them a value of about 4 billion. And that's not by no means looking at an overvaluation there. If you were to just take the HPC contract alone and look at the revenues and the profits achieved from that there, and apply a price earnings ratio to that level of profit, even if you used 15 or 20 X as a valuation, you're talking significantly higher than 4 billion. And bear in mind, they've got then 25 exahash of Bitcoin mining. In terms of majority of that is self mining, and they've got a hosting business of about 5 exahash, 5 or 6 exahash, which again are both profitable businesses. So I think the share prices potentially could go a lot higher this year than where it is at the moment. If and bear in mind, they've only released 270 megawatts of their 500 megawatt commitment. If they get another 230 megawatts, the daily profit will be well in excess of $1 million a day just in HPC predictable profit. We're talking like year 3 for these contracts, because in the first years they're paying back some of the capital that will be used to build the facilities. But it's just looking, good update after good update this year for Core Scientific. And tomorrow that first part of the debt gets reassigned and the shares get issued, and then it's just then onto when the shareholders will convert their Core Dewey warrants to get debt free.
Yeah, very interesting update there. It doesn't matter what angle you slice Core Scientific by, it looks very promising, Anthony. And if you've been following the channel, doing your due diligence, you guys, this is a very logical trade that I think a lot of people really picked up on early and made a bunch of money on. So that's phenomenal. And as Adam said, Anthony, those W warrants, similar to options, you guys, the further in the money those get, the less intrinsic value there is in the warrant or the option. So people at some point are going to want to convert those over to shares. But like you said, Anthony, the market is forward looking. People already know this dilution schedule. And as we saw yesterday, still reacting very, very well to the planned dilution here. So a huge step in the right direction for Core Scientific. Another one we want to talk about, we've got 2 more production updates out. So we've got DMG Blockchain and Soluna Holdings. DMG operates in Christina Lake, BC, so 1 province over from me. It's getting very hot in BC, Anthony. 39 degrees Celsius at the lake this weekend. DMG obviously installing their immersion this year. A number of plans to really retrofit this facility. What are you seeing from DMG?
Yeah, so one thing about DMG in the last sort of like 12 months is their growth in hash rate hasn't been it haven't really achieved their targets. I think they had a target of about 2 exahash by the end of last year. That target is now the end of 2024. But the good news is they're expecting the 4,550 of the T21 Bitcoin miners. These are sort of like the miners that we had Ben Gagnon talking about on a previous podcast, and how well they were working, delivering something like 30% more efficiency and output than the actual box stated. So Sheldon's ordered for over 4,500 of those, and they expect to be completely energized by the end of July. That will take the fleet from its current hash rate of just under 1 exahash, is at 0.98 at the moment, all the way up to 1.7. So nearly effectively doubling the hash rate in a month. So that'll be very much welcome from shareholders and from DMG themselves. In the month of June, they mined 24 Bitcoin. And in terms of Bitcoin per exahash, it was probably one of the highest metrics from the miners. So again, we've seen DMG be fairly consistent. They're in that sort of like top 4 or 5 miners on a monthly basis in terms of their productivity with the machines that they've got. So they tend to do well, even though they're a small miner. One thing they have got that a number of other miners haven't got is they've got a decent balance. So they've got 464 Bitcoin on the balance sheet there, and that gives them a really good treasury position there of 29 million. So that helps them in if they need to sort of like opportunities come their way, they can sort of they've got a treasury position there to utilize that. But looking forward to the update for July, because we've been promised these machines now for a couple of months, and it's sort of now they've actually stipulated it will be installed and energized in July. We should start seeing that production increase. in July and August as those miners are energized. But yeah, a good update.
Big jump in hash rate, going up almost 70%, like you say, from just under 1 to 1.7. So that's going to be a big month. I can only imagine how excited Sheldon and Steven are out there in BC plugging those miners in finally. Now, next up, we've got Soluna. So John Bell is there. We just talked about their pipeline of megawatts, and we've had them on the channel a number of times talking about this renewable energy strategy and how they're able to really find this stranded energy behind the meter. They've also now come out with production result for the month of June. Anthony, what are you thinking about Soluna right now?
Yeah, I like Soluna. They're probably the smallest in terms of market capitalization, the smallest miner that we cover in our monthly analysis. They've got a number of different a number of revenue streams in their portfolio. So they do self-mine, and they're self-mining for June. They operated around about 700 petahash. Now that's a little bit down on where they've been in previous months. They were up just above 800 petahash in some months before. So some of the weather has meant they've had to curtail a little bit more in the month of June. But they produced 17 Bitcoin. So again, in terms of production per month, a really solid amount of Bitcoin with the amount of machines that they've got energized. They also have, again, 1.5 exahash of hosting as well. So they are a host company, and because of their energy price, which is lower than 3 cents a kilowatt hour, that enables them to get a reasonably good margin because they're able to pass on a good energy price to their customers. And if you think about, with Marathon, when they're still hosted significant amounts of their fleet, they were paying upwards of 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So if your energy price is, under 3, and you can add a nice margin to that, you can probably get well inside the figure that Marathon are paying, and it's a win-win for both companies. It's a win for the host and the win for the hosted company because of that energy price. They've also announced in recent weeks about some of their projects that are coming online. So they had the Project Dorothy 2. They got the funding secured for that there. And that's going to start driving some revenues in the Q4 of this year. So they received about 30 million of funding to deliver that project there, and there's a revenue share at the back end. That's a good news there. They also announced it recently again a couple of weeks ago that they've closed a 12.5 million secured credit facility for their GPU contract, and this is a Soluna cloud business. So this is like the HPC, and as at the 8th of July, the convertible note holders, so this is some of the debt that's held on the balance sheet, have reduced their balances from 7.7 million down to 4.5 million by converting those notes to shares. So effectively in the same way we've just discussed the likes of Core Scientific having exercised their notes and converted those into shares. This has happened again with Soluna here. So and that means that their number of shares outstanding has increased now from 3.9 million up to 5.38 million as at July the 8th. Again, great to get debt off the balance sheet. The share price has had a real good couple of months now. I mean, it reached last month, it was well over $8, heading towards $9. It's certainly at the moment above $6. And if you go back to April, it was sort of around the $3 mark there. So it's had some real good movement. And people are starting to pick up on the fact, yes, it's a small miner, but it seems to be, punching a little bit above its weight at the moment. It's doing things project by project. So the next one that they'll be announcing will be Project Catty, which is, I think, 166 megawatts of power associated with that project there. So we'll hopefully in the next month or so get some news updates on those. And these projects can run concurrently together. And they have a really good plan in place. And if you look at the revenues in their presentation for this year and for next year, they show the revenues based on a sort of like a prudent Bitcoin price, where the hash price, the daily price per petahash, where it's at $45, and they also do one at $65 a day. So I think today, I looked this morning, that the hash price is at about 47. So using their prudent price, you can see what the projected revenues are this year at that price there. And if the Bitcoin price picks up like we anticipate it will do post a halving, like it has on every other cycle, then they show another hash price at $65 a day per petahash. So you have two options there to look at and base some of your analysis before you're making decisions on whether you buy the stock. So yeah, good update from Soluna.
Yeah, it certainly was. We really need Germany over there and Mount Gox to stop selling all their Bitcoin, Anthony. We can let these ETFs get back to work and see some price action for Bitcoin, but a lot going on at Soluna. Very interesting business model if you're not familiar. Now, Anthony, they say timing is everything, and very coincidentally yesterday, we had the Bitfarms announcement of the CEO appointment. We also had an announcement from Riot talking about the launch of this website, basically a better Bitfarms. So another interesting development in the Riot Bitfarms saga. What's your take on this one?
Well, we know that since April, it's been publicly announced that Riot Platforms were very interested. An unsolicited offer, to Bitfarms of $2.30 a share, which at the time they gave that offer, it was about a 30% premium on what the average share price had been during the last 3 months. So that was quickly pushed back by the board, who set up a group to look through the offer. And it was pushed back there on the grounds that it was certainly a insufficient number, but they weren't prepared to give a number to Riot to relook at. Now we've since found out that these discussions have been going on for probably 15 months. So for the first sort of 12, 13 months of those discussions, nobody outside of Bitfarms and Riot really knew what was going on, because there's nothing out there in the public domain. And as I say, it came as initially it came as a shock to a lot of people that this was was happening. I mean, I know some people spoke about merger and acquisition, but we discussed about buying sort of like these the infrastructure and power to get to sort of the size that Bitfarms was, and how much that would cost, and then what the Riot were prepared to pay, and there was like a gulf between those two figures. But when you take a step back and think, actually, if power and infrastructure is the bottleneck, and that's the challenge of getting it now, then you are going to pay a premium. And it looks like the premium for some of these companies now is around about 100 million per exahash. So that was interesting. But yesterday's announcement from Bitfarms, with Ben Gagnon being announced as the new CEO, literally, an hour or two later, Riot released an update to say that they've now put a website or launched a website called the betterbitfarms.com, and basically they're putting their case forward to shareholders as to why they think Bitfarms should reconstitute the board by appointing 3 independent directors, and Riot have actually suggested 3 independent directors, which is an interesting point, that they've announced that these are independent, and they want to have a special meeting with the shareholders to have an opportunity to look at removing the current directors. So this comes, again, it comes just after the announcement a few weeks ago that Fanny Phillip, who was the previous chief operating officer of SATO Technology, she joined the board, And as Ben said yesterday, she brings a wealth of experience, certainly from a finance perspective. So Fanny, like myself, she's CPA, and she'll be, looking at joining a lot of the committees, the financial effective committees at Bitfarms. So looking at audit committee and a number of other committees that she can provide some of her expertise in there. So this is interesting. It's going to be a bit of a cat and mouse now. We know that Riot have 15% or just fractionally under 15%. I think it's 14.9% of the shares in Bitfarms. Those shares are probably a really good premium. Bear in mind they were buying shares and then they made the offer of $2.30. So you can imagine that Riot have got those shares in significantly lower than the current share price of Bitfarms. So if they are unsuccessful, then they might still make a premium on those. But I think obviously their key is to acquire Bitfarms because they like the company itself. They're not too keen on the board of directors, and they articulate on this website as to why they're not too keen. And it's down to, at the end of the day, because there's no major shareholder in Bitfarms apart from Riot. They're hoping that the shareholders will look at the information available, and if it comes to a vote, it is down to the shareholders. There's no sort of like major shareholder like you've got with the likes of TeraWulf, or maybe SATO Technology, or maybe DMG. Some of these companies have got big insider holdings of shareholders, and so it's very difficult to make a decision from an external perspective. But the two biggest shareholders outside of Riot in Bitfarms, that's the chairman and one of the other directors, I think between them have just over 2% of the shares. So they've got no effectively voting power to change things there. And that's why Riot are looking for the shareholders to say, come on, this company, it's a great company, but it's not delivered as people have expected. Now, there's obviously the Bitfarms shareholders, they're critical about Riot's performance as well. So they're saying, well, you're saying come and take over our company, and there's a challenge there with Riot's performance. But I'm a shareholder in both companies, and for me, when I heard the initial news, I was just thinking this is going to be if they do join, it's the biggest mining company in the world. And with that comes all the benefits of being the biggest mining company. But equally, they could still operate really well independent of each other. We know that they've both got significant growth targets this year. So we've just said already about Ben's now focus on getting to 21 exahash by the end of the year, and he's not stopping there now. They've just recently, so even since this news, they bought a new facility at 120 megawatts. Some of that's going to be used for high performance computing. Riot, we know, are going to grow to 31 exahash by the end of the year, and then further increase that into the 40s next year. And they've got a long-term plan to deliver 100 exahash, and this is outside of the Bitfarms deal. So if they were to acquire Bitfarms, that would just mean that deadline will be brought forward because they'd have another 20 exahash by the end of the year. And I think from their position, Riot seems to think because they've got the strength of the balance sheet, probably the strongest balance sheet of all the Bitcoin miners, that it makes it an interesting acquisition because it just takes away any uncertainty about costs going forward. They've got the real strength to deliver everything, and they could get Bitfarms to where they need to be without having to go out and significantly borrow funds. They've got a big treasury. I think over well over $1 billion on the balance sheet at the moment in terms of treasury position. But it'll be interesting. I mean, it's, as I say, it's a website. It'll be down to the shareholders if they get this special meeting there. What it looks like at the moment is a lot of shareholders are probably saying no to it, but time will tell. Bitfarms just need to keep producing what they're doing at the moment, achieving their targets, and showing that they can operate, better going forward.
For sure. Really interesting storyline now with the appointment of the new CEO, Ben at the helm. It's going to be interesting to see how that changes this M&A situation, Anthony. And it's really appearing now companies are becoming more creative as megawatts are becoming more scarce. So traditionally, you could go out, you could build these sites, you could acquire sites. Now the option looks like you can actually invest in other companies to get access to their infrastructure. And I guess in a way, if they own 15% of Bitfarms, Bitfarms has 20 exahash, then in theory, they've got about 3 exahash within the Bitfarms portfolio. I'd be interested, Anthony, and actually your opinion right now. Do you think there's other companies like this investing in their competitors right now that are under that 10% threshold that we just don't know about? Or do you think this is a more isolated case?
I don't think it's isolated. I mean, bear in mind, this discussion between Bitfarms and Riot been going on for 13 months before we all heard about it. So, you know, who's to say other similar discussions aren't going on in other companies? You know, we'll have Hive coming on the podcast in the next week or so with Aidan and Frank, and maybe we ask them because, you know, when looking at valuation of companies, you know, they're one of the sort of like, in terms of valuing the hash rate, one of the most undervalued out there. And they've got a HPC business on top of that, which is starting to grow now. And we'll get an update from Frank and Aidan on how quickly that's growing, because we want to see some more updates. I think at the moment it's operating around about the 10 million annualized revenues based on their most recent update. And I think they've got a target of 20 million. So that's outside of the self-mining. And we're valuing companies only on the self-mining elements at the moment. So it wouldn't surprise me if their phone's been going, or they're being looked at as a potential company for acquisition. You know, there's such a gap between Hive and the next mining company up. You know, we've talked about this on the previous podcast. You know, you're looking at 600-700 million after Hive and Bit Digital are roughly about the same market capitalization, just under 400 million. And then you're into sort of like the Bitfarms who are over 1 billion. So there's you know, go back 6 months ago, there was never any sort of gap that size. There was a gap between, you know, the Marathon and the Riots and the rest of them. And then you had CleanSpark join that group. Now you've got IREN joining that group. Now you've got CORZ Scientific joining the group. Today, TeraWulf as well. The market's you know, a little bit dropped to them up today. But if you go back to yesterday, TeraWulf are valued at nearly 1.9 billion yesterday. You know, CORZ Scientific, when those additional shares are applied tomorrow, will take them well over 2 billion market capitalization. If the share price, you know, remains at between $9.50 and $10. So, you know, and literally, you know, nearly half the debt off the balance sheet's gone in the first 6 months. So, you know, but yeah, Hive and those other smaller miners are all certainly, you know, acquisition potential, because if you look at what their valuations, look at the hash rate they're driving, all of those miners from Hive below have got sort of a floor price of well under 100 million. If we're using that floor price, then there's opportunities there. And it wouldn't surprise me if there has been some calls or discussions about, you know, because that's the only way these companies are going to manage. You've got to, you know, merge to grow. Otherwise, you just stay, you know, sort of like just doing the same thing month after month. The growth will be effective. These big miners we're talking about are growing 1-2 exahash a month now. This next 6 months, there'll be 5 or 6 miners who are growing at least 2 exahash a month. And that's the size of some of these smaller miners. And bear in mind, 2 years ago, these companies were at the same size as they are now. But just the challenge to grow now is difficult. There's not a lot of levers you can pull. Debts, you can't go through the debt routes, and not many of them, apart from DMG. Hive and Bit Digital have actually got great treasury balances. Both of them have got about 150 million, maybe more, of crypto on their balance sheet. With Bit Digital have got no debt. Hive have got a little bit of debt. DMG have got no debt, but they've got this, you know, 464 Bitcoin. So, you know, they've got some treasury position there, but it's just a case of how quick they can move. And you need to be able to move quickly. And the market is looking at that now. They're looking at hash rate, looking at HPC. And the companies that are growing both of those are getting rewarded.
Yeah, a little bit like quicksand, Anthony, in the Bitcoin mining world. If you're not growing, you're shrinking. And as the competitors, the global hash rate continue to increase, your portion of that pie gets smaller and smaller. So that'll be interesting one to follow. Anthony, an action-packed hour here. We went the full 60 minutes. Updates on many of your top miners. If you're still here at this point, hit the like button below, you guys. Big help to ourselves and the channel. If you're not subscribed, feel free to join McNallie Money. Almost at 45,000 subscribers, Anthony, which is our goal before we go down to Nashville for the big Bitcoin conference. And finally, leave a question in the comment section below. Let us know how you're feeling about the space, if your portfolio's in the red today like ours, and your outlook for the back half of the year. Thanks so much, you guys. We'll talk to you tomorrow.